Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I have a collection of ghost stories for your listening pleasure. I do hope you enjoy. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content for videos every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. But for now it's time to get comfortable, download our app, and let the darkness take control. My grandmother died when I was around 6 years old. Fell down a straight flight of stairs backwards. Now this was in a nice beach home, and everyone went to visit there for the summer, and everybody always noticed the top step was strange. You would miss the top step, and either stomp your foot down on the flat of the floor thinking there was one more step, or you would think you reached the top when you didn't. The flub and dismount, and ended up stumbling backwards. It was really strange, as the steps were correctly shaped and sized, but something about the trim work nearby would mislead you into improperly judging the top of the staircase unless you were paying close attention. This is what effectively killed my grandmother. She was heading up to bed, missed the step, fell backwards down the stairs, tried to grab the handrail, missed, and there were marks in the drywall from her rings digging against the wall as she went down and everything. She apparently did a full backward roll when she reached the bottom, and had done an entire backflip and cracked the back of her skull against the banister at the bottom rail. She made it to the hospital but was effectively brain dead with severe trauma to the back of the skull and brain. They pulled the plug once the family was able to come and say goodbye, but they didn't let us kids in. Fast forward 4 years later, I'm 9 or 10 and I'm visiting for summer with the family. The cousins are there, sister, mom, dad, the works. We've all been on the beach, swimming and snorkeling. In true dumb kid fashion, I have mild sunburn, and we're heading in for the day because we have some place to go, so everyone needs to get changed, and all the bedrooms are upstairs. I'm heading up the stairs first, talking to my mum, thinking she is right behind me, and sure enough, I hit the trick step and miss it. My foot stumbles and I start staggering backwards, and my hand misses the railing just like my grandmother did. My hand even scuffed the same marks my grandmother's ring made. I had drywall dust on my knuckles after this. Nobody bothered to fix the rim marks. I don't know why. Thankfully, someone planted their hand right in the middle of my back before I tripped too far over backwards and just pushed me upright until I was able to grab the hand railing. Startled, because I had nearly fallen backwards, I snatched the railing and yanked myself upright again and said, "Whoa, thanks, Mum," and looked back at her. But she was at the bottom of the stairs looking up at me, as was my sister and my 2 cousins. They were all 15 feet away at the bottom of the stairs, about to start their way up. As they were all staring at me, white as a sheet, because they'd all just seen what happened. They also told me right afterwards they saw a handprint pressed into my back and leave an indent in the skin until I grabbed the handrail. And I had a handprint shape in my sunburn, which had marks on it where my grandmother's rings would have been on her hand. After the initial shock of everyone sharing what they saw, it quickly sank in that they all saw the same thing, and they promptly didn't want to speak of it anymore. When my grandfather finally died nearly 20 years later, we found out she was buried in the wrong grave. They couldn't find the grave, they buried someone else in her plot. They buried yet someone else next to that plot, which was supposed to be for my grandfather, and the company that now owned the graveyard was giving the family complete runaround corporate hush trying to appease the problem without fixing it. I ended up threatening the corporate rep, the undertaker and the manager of the graveyard in a private meeting, and remind them that they were 2 weeks behind the gigantic funeral home fiasco in Chicago, and the media would love to hear this story of them burying people in the wrong places and not knowing who's buried where and then trying to weasel their way out of it instead of correcting it. It took 3 months, a state investigation, and exhuming 4 different graves, 2 of which were Jane Doe's. They had to be identified, and then shipping my grandparents to another state to finally bury them together. I was a leasing agent. We deal with a surprisingly high amount of deaths. Brant was my worst suicide and most creepy. I'll never forget him, and he made sure of that. Brant was a weird resident, but nice, always chatted with me, and you could tell he was hurting from his PTSD. Around Christmas, his packages sat too long in the office for pickup, and I figured he was on vacation. Shortly after New Year's, his parents called and asked to speak to me directly. Manager hands me the phone, and they tell me they haven't been able to get a hold of him for weeks, as they live out of state. I tell them to call the police department, as we're not allowed due to privacy laws, and I grab my keys and head for his apartment. His dog, Ricky, was barking. I check the front door and it cracks open, and the smell hit my face like a ton of bricks. He's dead, and had been dead. The police arrive. Turns out Brandt shot himself and sat for 10 days. I had to ID him before they called his family. The dog actually started to eat him due to not going out for so long. The residents above and on the side and behind noped out, and we let them go. At this point, I think I'm losing my mind because I keep seeing Brandt out of the corner of my eyes at work. Only at work. Sometimes I'd see him walk by the office window, and I would yell for my manager, who believed me, but thankfully she never saw him. After about a month of this, we get his place cleaned up and turned over the apartments to a pair of little Korean sisters who moved in next door. The apartment shares a wall with his bedroom. At this point, no one in the area knows what happened, and because of Brandt being a shut-in, no one knew him or who he was. Cookie, one of the sisters, comes in and asks me one day if someone died in their apartment. I tell her no. She says there's a man around her apartment and is distraught about not being able to cross over. At this point, I ask her if she's seen him, and she describes Brandt. I tell her about what happened, and she assures me she'll do a crossover ceremony for him that evening, and also gave me a bit of sage later that day. I never saw or felt Brandt again after that night. I was at my grandpa's house in southern Indiana at the time. He had a really long driveway, so I drove a golf cart to get the mail. As I was coming up, I swear I saw my great-grandpa, who had been dead for a few years by then. I looked over at the passenger side and saw him smiling at me. It scared me so much I slammed on the brakes and looked back, but he was gone. Then I saw something running into the woods that looked like a human. I tried to drive away but was stuck in mud, so I got out and ran the rest of the way. I told everyone, and they ran down to check. As they were going, my aunt told me that ever since we got their grandpa's dog, he'd been acting crazy, so we think someone was out there. There was also a short story where in the 4th of July my sister saw a toddler roll down the hill and hit her head. She panicked, told my mum, and by the time they looked back, the girl was gone. Judging by how scared my sister was, she couldn't have faked it either. My family has experienced a lot of things just like that. I was about 4 when this happened. I had seen shadows on the wall and stuff like that. I told my parents and was met with the whole overactive imagination thing. My parents also had their instances with the paranormal, but weren't all that worried about them. That was until one calm night in the summer. My house has the front door leading to a set of stairs that takes you to the living room with the hallway attached. The hallway first has the bathroom on the right, then the baby room for my soon-arriving little brother, my room at the end to the left, and my parents' room right across from it. I don't remember what time it was, other than it was past midnight on Friday. So actually really early Saturday morning, I wake up to heavy footfalls in the hallway. I mean heavy graveyard boots, and the dude who was wearing them had enough of today's type heavy gear, so after hearing this I booked it to my parents' room. I thought I would have to wake them, but the footsteps were so loud that they were also awoken by them. I jumped on their bed, immediately got under the covers and told them what happened. They were both still groggy from waking up so suddenly and didn't realize if they'd heard the footfalls or not. That was until they sounded like they were right outside my parents' bedroom door. Another thing I should mention is we always left the doors open in our rooms when there wasn't any company in the house, so we saw nothing at the door, but sure as hell heard it. My dad immediately grabbed his 9mm from under his pillow and cleared the entire house. There was nobody else but us 3. Nothing happened for the rest of the night. We couldn't explain what happened the next morning, so we went on with chores we had planned. In the hallway we have 2 small carpets. We picked them up and brought them outside since they needed a legitimate wash, not just to be vacuumed. As my dad and I were hosing the carpets down outside, my mum went back in to do vacuuming. She quickly ran back outside to grab my dad and I. When we walked back into the hallway, we were stunned. There were boot marks on the wood floor under the carpet. Keep in mind the carpets had no imprints or dirt on them. They were just old and dusty. To this day, my family can't explain what happened. We just accept that it did. I was living with a family I was close to after leaving my bad home at 18. They always joked about one specific hallway being haunted by a ghost they affectionately called Jerry. One day I had to go down the hall and felt something from behind. Ran and looked back when I got to the end of the hall and said, "Go away, Jerry." A few days later I come out of my bedroom that's at the top of a 13-step hardwood flight of stairs. I'm not wearing socks. I'm not dizzy and I feel fine. All of a sudden, something pushes my back hard, and I don't just fall down the stairs, I fly down them, flip over the side railing, crash full force to the ground and slide on my back and hit my head on the bedroom door that's at the bottom right of the stairs. It gave me a slight concussion, and everyone in the house emerged and asked what happened, and how did it happen, because the only way I could have fallen the way I did is if I was shoved from behind, and there was no one upstairs with me at the time. Throughout my life, I've had a number of spooky experiences. The first was when I was 12. I saw an old lady in 1800s attire, blue dress, blue bonnet, knitting something while crying. I stuck my head under the covers and looked again, and suddenly she was gone. Fast forward 12 years, and I was staying at my friend's house that he had inherited from his grandparents who died inside it the year prior. This was about 5 months of sobriety for me. The first encounter in that house about the second day I was there, I was awoken by what sounded like a loud, open-handed smack on the closet door which jolted me awake, then focused on controlling my heart rate. As cliché as it sounds, it seemed I would occasionally hear whispers, but I could never make out the words precisely. Just like in scary movies, but I always brushed it off. The second encounter inside my friend's house was when I was taking a shower with music on loud. I rinsed, turned the water off, opened the curtain, and right as I was grabbing my towel, the fire alarm went off for 10 seconds, stopped, went off again for a whole minute before stopping, and I figured it was the spirit messing with me, so I turned the music down and went about my day. The third encounter was when I was sleeping in my room. I had a pretty big pile of pocket change on my dresser at the time, and woke up to what sounded like someone running their hand through the change, making the loud pitch that US currency does. Again, I immediately started focusing on controlling my heart rate. 20 seconds later, I felt what seemed like 2 fingers run down my thigh. I tripped out so hard but eventually fell back asleep. The third encounter was when I started dating this girl that I knew I shouldn't have been, but for some reason I liked to torture myself. I was already thinking about breaking it off with her at this point. While we were laying in bed, literally, as I was thinking of breaking it off with her, I heard a whisper that I could make out the word break in it, about 6 other words long. As I was trying to form sentences around the whisper, I just heard there was a tapping at my bedroom window, 2 sets of 5 taps. After the second set, I asked her if she heard the tapping, and she said yes. Then it stopped. I broke up with her the next day. My fourth encounter. I had broken up with her the day before, while I was in my room, and I was listening to music and writing my thoughts down on a piece of paper, when I heard what sounded like an old man yell my name from out loud from the hallway. So I shouted back, "Yo!" thinking perhaps it was my friend, and got no response. My friend was smoking his bong inside his bathroom in his room, and told him what I had just heard. After I told him, I could feel what felt like electricity spiking through my brain. It just felt tingly, but it was tingling for the most part in the back, or the cerebellum. I started to trip a little, so went to sit on the front porch with my friend and came with. As we were chilling there, a three-legged cat that would sometimes come around came directly to me, which it never did, and sat underneath a chair. It stayed under my chair until it left, which then I realized my brain was feeling normal. I moved out shortly after into an apartment by myself. I ended up getting back with the girl I was with during this, and she ended up dying in my apartment on Christmas morning. And to those of you wondering, the thing that my ex regrettably died from was an overdose. I'm still convinced it was a positive ghost that wanted to help in some way. He ended up selling the house to his cousin and cousin's wife. About a year ago, I asked if anything weird had been happening in the house, and his wife said that she had heard sounds like children's laughter, and sometimes tapping. We both agreed that it didn't feel like a negative energy. I'm convinced it's one of his grandparents, which are also my distant relatives. I want to learn more and get involved with others dealing with spiritual entities, for I feel I'm more sensitive than perhaps your average person. My husband does not believe in the paranormal. Me, on the other hand, does, to the point of knocking on walls to get the ghosts to come out and play. One evening I went out quickly to pick up some dinner for me and my husband before a friend came over. While I was at the place and ordering, they didn't have what he wanted, so I called him. He answered the phone and sounded off. He asked me to come home quick because something happened. I go into panic mode and I could hear the distress in his voice. After some badgering, I made him tell me what happened. I have a little shadow box with a small porcelain bisque doll mounted in it called Frozen Charlotte. There is a creepy story behind the dolls, and I bought it for the creep factor. I firmly believe the doll and shadow box are not haunted. Apparently, as my husband was chilling in the living room waiting for me, the shadow box launched at him from the small hallway and the way where it was hung into the living room where he was sitting. It was a very far distance for it to travel. He got really spooked and went outside to have a cigarette when I called. I was a little creeped out but more curious and envious that he got to have the ghost throw something at his head and I didn't. I got our food and headed home. While I was on my way home, he was outside and our friend showed up. They both go into the house to see the kitchen was an absolute disaster. Every drawer was open, cabinets, and the trash that sits in front of one drawer was tipped over. The drawer in question is where I keep kitchen linens. It was open with all the towels, tablecloths, and placement mats strewn over the place. My husband said to our friend, "It wasn't like this earlier." So I come home and my friend is standing on our back stoop and is like, "Come inside and see." I was pretty shocked. The place was pretty messy, as my husband was freaked out. I put the food down and started cleaning, put the towels back into the bottom drawer and shoved the drawer closed. The drawer is super old and isn't on runners or anything, it won't close. I sigh and heave the thing out because I thought a towel or something got trapped behind it. I was right, but it wasn't a towel. It was a small plastic baggie, and inside it had a bit of paper and a string tied around it. I'd never seen this thing before, and was no idea what it was. So I open the baggie and untie the teeny tiny package and find some herbs. My friend almost gleefully says, "That is weed," and true enough I took a whiff and it was. The paper looked like a tea bag, as the string the whole thing package was wrapped up in, and it looked like a tea bag string. The amount of weed could have covered a nickel, so it wasn't much. We don't usually keep weed in the house, and if we do, it's usually in a joint. The conclusion I have is that this ghost was looking for the weed, because there's no other explanation for me. I don't believe my husband would stage this, as you can't fake his reaction. He was pale as a ghost and shaking terribly. Plus, as he was hanging up on the phone, my friend was coming up the driveway and saw him. I doubt there would have been enough time to stage the scene, as it were. We haven't had any other things happen like that, with the exception of the ghost that lives in the bathroom. But that is a story for another day. There's one event that has always messed with me, and probably will until the day I die. I rented a room in a house that my friend had recently purchased after my mum moved in with a boyfriend, and I didn't want to live with him because he's a jackass. It was a decent little 2-bedroom, one on each side of the house. I had only been living there for a month or two and everything had been pretty chill. My father had died around January of that year, and my mum didn't want to keep his urn in her house or put it in storage. A little backstory. My dad was a bastard. I never really had a relationship with him and hadn't seen or heard from him during the last 6 years of his life until the cops knocked on the door in the middle of the night and told me he had overdosed. I was not surprised, and neither was anyone else. We all saw it coming. So we got him cremated and debated back and forth what to do with him, and nothing ever came of it. So anyway, I'm moving in, and I felt kind of guilty putting the urn in storage, so I just stuck it in the closet. Now onto the spooky stuff. I wake up in the middle of the night, which happens frequently, and have never really been a great sleeper, so this is nothing unusual. I'm sweating balls for no reason and I check the clock. It's about 3:58 or so and I'm thinking, damn, I'm never going to get back to sleep, and I'm a little pissed. So I'm just sitting there thinking what I should do for a minute when I hear a noise. It sounds like someone was trying the doorknob, but I know the door isn't locked. I trust my roommate completely, and I've never had any reason to lock my door besides. It's his house. So I call out, "Nick, you awake, dude?" and get no response. I notice the noise has stopped. I'm a little weirded out, but I do not leave the bed, just lay back down and try to sleep. As I'm laying there, I notice my closet door is open, and I was looking directly at my father's urn. I felt like I was being stared at or something, but I try not to think about it. I eventually fall asleep and get up around 10 a.m. As I come out of the room and into the kitchen, I see my roommate sitting on the couch, holding a gigantic kitchen knife, and he looks absolutely terrified. He looks at me like the devil himself just walked out of my room. He literally jumps off the couch and screams, "What's wrong with you? Are you trying to kill me? That was not funny." I'm all sorts of confused and trying to figure out what the hell he's talking about. Then he lays it on me. This is his account of what he heard the previous night. He wakes up at 4 a.m. to a blood-curdling scream, obviously craps himself and jumps out of bed terrified. Then silence. He creeps into the kitchen, down the hall from my room, and calls my name. "You right?" Nothing for a few seconds. Then another scream. He said it sounded like I was being murdered, grabs the kitchen knife and rungs at my door and bangs on it a few times. There is no response, so he tries the door. It's locked. Bangs on it again. Then there's a weird shuffling noise as if someone is dragging their feet across the hardwood floor. Sounds like someone straight up walked up to the door but didn't open it. He freaks out and doesn't know what to do. He just stands away from the door for a while, ready to stab. After a few minutes of this, he just backs away, staring at the door, and stays awake until daylight. So we collectively crap ourselves, as I turn white as we look at each other when it dawns on us. We had both been awake at the same time, 4 a.m. Both of us called out each other's names and got no response. I didn't hear him, he didn't hear me. We couldn't hear each other through a crappy hollow wooden door. If someone was banging on my door, I would have been up in half a second. It was impossible for me to sleep through something like that. I heard no screams. It was possible that I was having a nightmare or something and screamed when I awoke, but there wasn't just one, there was two. I didn't hear either. The door was apparently locked, but it wasn't when I awoke. Why didn't he call the police? I'll never know. His family is Greek and very superstitious, so he had the local priest or whatever they call them bless the house. I'm not much of a believer in ghosts and stuff, but after a while I put the old man's ashes into storage, and nothing weird has happened before or since. We never found an explanation for this, other than maybe my dad's ghost came back to scare me. This is my story. All of it is true. My roommate and I had just moved to Denver. His name was Tyler. He was gay, and for the first time in his life, he was surrounded by other gay people. For the first few weeks, I didn't see much of him. He was getting as much ass as he could, and I was content in our apartment alone. Nothing about it freaked me out. A photo on my wall had fallen off, and that was strange, but I figured it was just gravity. Tyler finally stayed the night in the apartment. We were sharing a bed because he hadn't gotten one yet. We were both drunk, and that night, as soon as I turned off the lamp, the blinds started moving. Tyler was freaked out, but I was drunk and tired and brushed it off as just a breeze. He went and slept in the living room. I stayed in the bedroom and told him to chill out and that it was nothing. Nothing else happened that night. But we did bring it back up the next day. We both laughed. I said, "What should we name our ghost?" Tyler replied, "Bill." For the rest of the day, we continued to crack little jokes about Bill. That night, while getting ready into bed and about to turn off the lamp, Tyler whispered, "Bill doesn't like the dark." The blinds immediately started lashing all around. I turned the lamp back on, and we both sat up and just watched. I still wasn't convinced. He made me get out of bed to check where it was coming from because I wasn't scared. I looked for any kind of vent or open window, but nothing made sense. I had a little radio in the windowsill and it had fallen out. I put it back up, climbed back into bed and tried to calm Tyler. Again, I turned the lamp off. Then they started going again. But this time, with far more intensity. We stared, and this time I did get scared. I did what anyone who thinks they may be encountering something did. I tried to talk to it. "Do you want us to leave?" The blinds were still going crazy. At that point I was terrified. I jumped out of bed and packed a quick bag and headed to my childhood friend's house. I didn't sleep that night. I just shuddered in fear. Our next journey would be to try and figure out a way to get rid of Bill. We headed back to the apartment because we needed the internet to find an exorcist. I went into the house, shaking in fear, sitting on the floor in the corner. Tyler called a few churches. We didn't actually get any help. We got really confused responses. Tyler stands up and looks in the kitchen. He covers his mouth and slowly walks backwards. The burners were all on, all of them, on different settings. I ran out the house. Tyler followed suit after turning the burners off. We sat in the car panicking. "We have to call the leasing office and get the hell out of this lease," I said. That was an awkward phone call. The manager didn't believe us and thought we were idiots, but I told her everything stated above. She said that she would look into it and call us back. "I left my cigarettes in the house," Tyler cried. But screw that, I wasn't about to go back in there. He talked me into standing by the front door while he grabbed them. All of the water sources were on, every sink and shower in the apartment. I'm hysterical at this point and run to the car. "We have to turn the water off, dude." I collected myself and walked to the door again with him. Perfect timing. 2 leasing ladies came down because we were the talk of the office. I asked her to please turn off the water because we were too scared. We all stood inside by the front door and told them the whole story. One of them put her hand over the burner. "They're still warm." They didn't make that up. They kind of believed us, but not really. Well, that's not until the maintenance guy encountered Bill. Todd. Apparently after we left, Todd and his co-worker were walking past my apartment. He said he was laughing with them about our story. Right as he walked by, the deadbolt locked. He looked at the other guy, and then he grabbed his keys. No one's supposed to be in there. Bit weird. He knocked on the door for a while, but no one came, so he stuck his set of keys into the door, and it felt like someone was holding the deadbolt shut. He couldn't open it. He tried the balcony door as we were on the first floor, and that wouldn't unlock either. He tried again with the front door, and then it unlocked with ease. After that point, they actually believed us and allowed us to live in a different apartment. The next day sucked. I had to repack again, but I couldn't stay in the house because I was just terrified to death. I had some guy who wanted to sleep with me move everything for me. We spent the entire day moving, and I laid on the dining room floor with a boy who liked me. It honestly just felt good to be held. I played in his arms, and I watched the blinds slowly close by themselves. I cried. Moving didn't help. We did all of that stuff for nothing, and now I'm in a layout I hate. We continued to try and find a way to get rid of Bill ourselves. That included blacking out every night and mocking it. Ugh, we were so stupid. We bought some more sticker decal to decorate our rooms. He bought a big Paris sticker which he stuck and put on our wall. It ripped off. We put it back up. It peeled right off. I thought it could just be the wall paint because I was trying to think logically like a normal person, and nothing else happened on the first day. But then it escalated. Bill would pound on our bedroom wall from the minute we laid down to about 10 a.m. every night. We'd hardly sleep. I even laid by the wall to make sure it wasn't Tyler messing with me. One night, my upstairs neighbor came down very upset. It was super fun to try and explain to my neighbor that it wasn't us banging on the walls. It was some sort of demon asshole thing. I even brought him into my room. He saw it with his own eyes and said, "Must be a raccoon in your wall or something." Yeah, a raccoon. People really don't want to believe in ghosts, do they? It messed with us to the point where we were scared and we couldn't sleep. It would change the shower water to scalding hot, throw lit candles off counters and just do lots of annoying stuff. But things started to get worse when Tyler finally saw it. I couldn't find him. It was almost bedtime, so he was going around the house turning off the lights. I didn't see him again. "Tyler?" No response. "Tyler, where are you? Why are the lights off?" I turned the bedroom light on. He was in bed, bundled up, completely covered. "What are you doing?" He wouldn't look at me. "Tyler, I'm getting scared." I saw him. I was so scared. I couldn't explain what kind of fear I felt. "Where?" I tried comforting him. He was crying. "In the bathroom." I went to turn off the light. He was right there. He had no eyes. We both sat up in the corner of the bedroom all night. We did act like total idiots and let our friends stay the night, and they didn't believe us. We would mock it and watch it thrash around mirrors and bang the walls, and they would stare in awe. God, we were really stupid. We couldn't do this anymore. We needed help. I ended up writing to a ghost hunter show, and she wanted to fly out to film if things escalated, but we couldn't wait. In the meantime, she did refer me to some guy who I'll call Zach. We met Zach at a local diner and explained everything. He came over to the house but couldn't sense a thing. He told us it was unlikely it was a ghost, that he'd been doing it for 20 years and only once encountered one, and it was because a family member was trapped there with some voodoo stuff. He said it was likely an entity. I still don't really understand what that means, but I knew it was real, and he gave us some directions on how to get rid of whatever it is. He told us to get salt and some other things, put them in bowls in the corner of the rooms of the house, to burn some sage, to open all the windows around us and to yell, "Get out," but to not do it lightly, no laughing, that we had to mean it. He said if anything new happened, to document it and report back to him. He told us to never acknowledge or talk about it in the house, and to never give it a name. Oops. That night, my childhood friend and boyfriend and Tyler all began the process. No one laughed. The energy around us was tense and silent. We did what we had to do and went out for pizza. These things only awoke the beast even more. We got home late and I went to the bathroom. The ball of salt had been flipped over. I was confused and went to check the others. They were all flipped over. When we left, we put the sage in a kitchen drawer. When we got home, it was shredded all over the floor, like you could do it with your bare hands or whatever. The drawer was still open. Later that night, Tyler and I were on the couch watching TV when he starts crying and pointing to the kitchen. "Look." I didn't see anything. "He's right there, can't you see him?" No, thank God, because I don't know if my heart could handle that. As soon as Tyler would look away, he said, "Bill disappeared." He was so scared and asked me to get him a soda. I didn't want to, but I understood his fear. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed it. One of the salt bins was ripped open. Again. I don't even know how that happened. It was lying on its side. Obviously, neither of us had done it. We had both reached maximum creep out at this point. It didn't take long for everything to escalate to a point where we could no longer deal with it. So Tyler and I tried to spend as little time as possible in the apartment. Sometimes we even ended up sleeping in the car. The activity was getting insane, things being thrown, and it was simply too challenging to deal with life at this point. I'll cut a long story short here. Tyler and I got into a huge falling out. I don't want to say what it was about, but he showed his true colors, and after that, I didn't want to have anything to do with him. Tyler ended up moving out, and once he did, everything ceased. I can't make this up. It was like a weight had been lifted over me and the apartment. The ambience of it felt completely different. I had a final conversation with Zach, who told me that he was pretty sure that would happen, as he was relatively certain that the entity, whatever it was attached to Tyler. I don't know what happened to Tyler now, but I do have severe PTSD, even just remembering this. It's a bit anticlimactic, really, him leaving and everything stopping, but I am truly so grateful that it did end once he left. I could move on with my life, but I do have quite severe PTSD. I can't even watch scary stories anymore, and can't sleep without a nightlight. Who knows what Tyler did to attach that entity to him? Maybe it was always in the apartment waiting for someone to latch onto, but in any case, I'm glad that I'm free of it. An ex of mine had a young son who had a tendency to sit up at night and talk to his friend. No biggie, kids and their imaginations, right? One day the girlfriend and I ordered a pizza, set up a movie, and the kid gets washed for bed. In his bath, I asked if he was ready to go to sleep, and he said that it would be lonely. I asked why, and he said his friend left. Fast forward 30 minutes, as I kill the lights to his bedroom and say goodnight, he turns to me with the biggest grin on his face and say, "He's here. He's back." That was when the doorbell rang. I about crapped my pants. Turns out it was just the pizza guy. We started hearing knocks on the sliding second-floor glass door, as if someone was there. This followed loud banging in the basement every night. I decided to record throughout the night, and this snowflake ornament started spinning long after they had all gone to bed. There were no drafts, as the other ornaments didn't move, and when I played it back, I heard a man's voice repeatedly calling me a hoe. I still live here. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, please be sure to let me know. Don't forget that you can download our app for even more stories. It's pretty good. I think you guys all like it. Link is, as always, in the description. I'd like to give a huge thanks to my members and patrons and coffee supporters. You guys are the best. Thank you all. Got some new content on Patreon now, so if you want to check that out, that would be pretty cool. I actually post some stuff on there for free every once in a while, so if you just check out my Patreon, you can get some some cool stuff if you want every once in a while. Yeah, it's fun. Did a whole load of exclusive police stories last year. It was they're pretty good. They're pretty creepy. But yeah, I hope you liked today's story. I'll be back again on, when is it? Thursday. Yeah, Thursday, with some pretty creepy haunted house stories. I think, probably. I think it's going to be haunted houses. It should be a good one. Keep up the spooky week. It's it's pretty good. I think I'm going to wrap things up here now, guys. I'm sorry for Leonora screaming in the background during one of the stories. She woke up towards the end and was feeling, there, you might even hear her now, she was feeling very animated and decided to yell, so I tried my best to edit out all the yells, but it wasn't always possible. But nonetheless, I did try. Well, that's it from me, guys. I hope you guys have all had a wonderful day, and see you in the next few days. Stay awesome. See you in the next one.